Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Focus Friday here on May the 31st. Today we're going to hit an update on crop progress across Michigan, give you a little insight on some of the service calls I've made this week, and we have another special guest with us, Dr. Chris DiFonzo from MSU, going to give us an idea of all the bugs that we may be seeing here right now and in the near future. So for the area update, according to the GHX app, we are at 393 heat units since that initial corn that we talked about planting in the early time period. And quite honestly, if that was real corn, that would be at V4 right now. And so it's kind of exciting. In reality, most of the corn I'm seeing around the state is V1, maybe a little V2, and unfortunately, there's still some corn yet to be planted and a little bit of VE. But as we think ahead on that, we're not all that far from V5 corn. And of course, V5 corn, where we got 5 of those leaf collars on there, is extremely important to production because that is when we're setting those rows around. And so we really want to make sure that corn is not having a bad day. So it thinks it's got all kinds of top end yield potential to put in there. And of course, shortly after that, we'll be sitting those rows long on those ears. The other thing is the overwintering crops, things like hay and wheat. I had a good chance to talk with Dennis Pennington the other day, and he said, according to his notes, that wheat is flowering 11 days ahead of schedule. So crops are moving along, and I think if you're even considering or have done double crop soybeans in the past, if we get some moisture, this might be a year we could make that happen. Also seeing a lot of hay cut out there. Mine, thankfully, is cut and in the barn. I don't do a lot of it, but it's good to have it there, and hopefully we get a few more dry days for folks to get theirs up if they don't have it in already. Service call update. Soybeans have been the service calls this year. A little bit of soybean replant out there. And, every year there's a couple of days you look back and say, probably shouldn't have planted those days. This year it was soybeans planted May 1st through the 5th. Seem to be those that are the popular ones for looking at replant. And the causes, a little bit of crusting out there, especially on those tighter clay soils. Seeing a lot of seed corn maggot, and we're going to talk to Chris about that one a little bit. But they are feeding through some of the seed treatment on that corn. But the good news is those fields that have good seed treatment on them are not really needing much in the way of replant. So that's nice to see. Also, finding some good old fashioned just planting depth issues. Those guys that push the envelope, maybe soil's a little tighter than they thought. Finding a couple places we're finding either the little trenches are not quite closed, we're not getting good soil to seed contact, or we're just not getting the depth on them and laying seed on top of the ground. So always good things to catch out there. But now is the time to get out of the truck and get in those fields and do that scouting, especially if you had some of that soybean planted in that first part of May. On to our special guest today. We do have with us Dr. Chris DiFonzo from Michigan State University in the entomology department there. She has been a tremendous friend to agriculture and to us here at Golden Harvest. And so, Chris, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Glad to be on.
Well, a couple things just want to talk with you about because it just seems like we've seen a lot of pests so far this year. I've got a couple of questions to go through. And the first is, I have made numerous potential replant calls on soybeans with seed corn maggot damage this spring. And I'm curious, why is it so bad this year? And what can we do about it for next year?
Well, most of the calls I've been getting have been in beans. And until the last few years, I never had calls in beans. I mean, it was pretty rare, maybe a little bit of feeding on that cotyledon, but the last couple of years, just a lot of calls. And I would not say it's the badness of the year. I would flip it and say that we humans are planting into fly risk like never before. So I think there's a combination of two things happening. We have milder winters, we're warming up earlier, and then we're pushing that planting window earlier, especially for beans. So what's happening is we're not getting kill of cover crops, or we have a lot of winter annual weeds, and then people are spraying a herbicide trying to work them in, and then they want to plant right away. when really you need to let that material break completely down. And if you don't, then you're planting into decaying stuff, which is exactly what the fly is going for to lay eggs. She's not laying eggs in the crop. She's laying eggs in rotting, green, fresh, rotting stuff, essentially. So we're trying to push that window. I've had calls where cover crops just didn't die over the winter as efficiently as they should have. And then again, that grower was planting in April. So we're planting a little bit earlier. We're planting too close to the time where weeds were tilled in or killed. We're planting right over top when those flies normally first emerge and lay eggs, which is typically probably mid to late April. We're planting too deep. You already mentioned that. We've had some issues with that. And the seed is taking a long time to get out of the ground. And then, it's being attacked by these seed corn maggots. And then the final thing about beans is if you read a seed treatment label really carefully, the seed treaters label, you find there's a per acre rate for that seed treatment. And if you divide that rate out per kernel on corn or per seed in beans, you find that the rate on beans per bean is less than that rate per kernel. So the amount of seed treatment would be less on that individual seed. And seed treatments aren't magic. So I've seen pictures of 7 maggots attacking 1 soybean. And
Wow.
that's just a hard lift for that seed treatment. And that's a person that planted right on the date of like peak fly emergence. So I attribute it to doing things different than what we've normally been doing 30 years ago, say.
Well, Chris, that is really good insight as we think about that because we are planting soybeans earlier,
Yeah.
and when we do that, we are planting them deeper, and those are all important things to do to be successful in early planted soybeans. But yeah, managing that cover crop and certainly making sure we've got a good seed treatment out there to at least have the best chance of getting those beans up.
If you're going to plant earlier, then that margin for weed control, really, ideally, you'd want to wait 2 to 3 weeks after you killed and tilled in stuff, right? And so,
Yep,
but if you're planting earlier, you don't have those 2 to 3 weeks, so you're risking it. So, and the
for
flies
sure.
have emerged now because I was out, on South Campus here, and there were just tons of these. They're not the size of a regular housefly. They're like half the size. They're like a mini housefly. And there were just thousands of them on my car and everywhere. And I realized I think that's seed corn maggot adult flies flying. So they're emerging now.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I was just north of Grand Rapids yesterday and in a field that had a pile of seed corn maggot damage. And these flies were just literally on the ground. They hadn't even been
Mm-hmm.
emerging long enough to have the wings dried off to take flight. But
Yeah. And if a
it's
guy was going
crazy.
to replant, at this point, that fly risk is very low
Yep.
because the green stuff's already decayed and it's warm and the seeds can get out of the ground fast. So if they're going to do a seed treatment, they're trying to, shave a little bit of money there, maybe the fungicide part of the seed treatment or the nematicide part and, the insecticide part would not be necessary, at least for the seed corn maggot at this point.
Very good. Well, you mentioned earlier a mild winter, and I guess I always think a lot about corn rootworm this time of the year as we're going to be expecting some of that hatch before too long. What do you think about the rootworm pressure for this year, especially with the heat units being so far ahead?
It could be a little earlier. Like I know our pupation on things like Asiatic garden beetle, it's about, you were talking about something being 11 days ahead or something like
The,
that,
the
10,
wheat
11 days.
flowering,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we were about 10 days ahead on like some of the grub kind of development. But I don't think that the mild winters would necessarily, if it's super cold, yeah, you can affect survival of corn rootworm. But if you're corn on corn on corn on corn, which is that's your risk for corn
Hmm.
rootworm, you know, a cold or not, or doesn't, the risk is the corn on corn on corn on corn building those populations. So I think if you're really risky and you've been corn for 10, 20 years or forever, I don't think it being a mild winter is increasing your risk necessarily. So I just think the bigger risk is the lack of crop rotation continuously.
Yep. No, I think you're right there. And, I was talking to my colleagues out west here earlier this morning. In fact, they're seeing the hatch of lightning bugs already, and it, tends to follow the hatch
Yeah,
similarly to the hatch of rootworms.
about the same degree days. So you could have a little bit of an earlier start if you've got your BT corn out there and it's still working, which we assume in Michigan we're pretty good, and we do still have good efficacy on those BT varieties, or potentially a high rate of seed treatment or whatever. That should do what it can. But in those situations where it's a 10-year corn on corn field, the solution there is to get crop rotation into the mix at least every few years if we possibly can.
Say the last question I've got as we wrap things up here today is just for my listeners here, wondering what's the next thing that we need to be scouting for in the next couple of weeks, so we don't get surprised by what the next insect's going to be out there.
I made a list for you, so that's good.
Hey, all
So
right.
I've gotten some pictures of true armyworm, and they were like nickel sized if they were kind of curled up, and
Yep.
that's still small enough to get decent control. So if you've got wheat and corn, if you don't trap, it's hard to know that you got a dump of moths upon you.
hmm
But as you're walking those fields for stripe rust or whatever else is going on, just look for that tattered feeding and look on the ground and look for the big poop pellets that they leave behind. And if you can get them when they're smaller, that's very, very sprayable. You mentioned alfalfa getting cut, and the next thing in there is going to be potato leafhopper management.
Yep.
Get out your sweep net. It's an easy pest to control, but a big yield loser if you don't. When you see yellowing, you're already losing.
Too
So
late.
it's
Yep.
really easy to kill. And of course, we haven't had soybean aphid for a very long time. I mean, it's always here, but not in huge numbers. And it'll start colonizing, especially when we're planting soybeans earlier. And a lot of those early populations, even if they come up a bit on your beans and they look kind of like, oh, there's a lot of things there, boy, do those recruit in the natural enemies. And typically the reason we haven't sprayed for years and years and years is we have a great group of natural enemies out there
Yep.
wiping these things out. So if you're going to spend money on something, I'm hoping it's not that maybe you need fungicide later.
There you go.
Something more important later, and don't spend it on insecticide you don't need now. So that's my final message.
Now, you didn't mention black cutworm. I'm just curious if you think we've got much risk for that this year, because I've seen a lot of those weedy fields, and boy, when I think about where cutworm are going to land and lay, it feels like there's
the
fields
cutworm
available.
flights have been done for quite a while, so I assume if it's out there, somebody would have seen it. But outside of black cutworm, we've seen a lot of other things that look like it's cutting, but it's not really black cutworm, it's something else. On beans, it looks like the hypocotyls trying to come out of the ground and it's getting stuck and it's
Just
breaking
breaking.
off.
Yep.
And people are saying, oh, it's black cutworm. And you look and there's a cotyledon stuck under the ground. Christy Sprague and I did a lot of digging yesterday and found a lot of that. Or it's deer damage.
Oh, absolutely. Seen a lot of that so far.
Four-footed cutworm. And but those will just mow down a road. I mean, a cutworm's not that smart to just follow one row. So there could be some out there, and they would be in the same locations as true armyworm in corn. Those very weedy, as you pointed out, weed control issues early.
And I did get a picture actually sent to me yesterday from Southwest Michigan with some black cutworm in there.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an eye on that.
They could be mixed together. And a lot of times, a person sprays and they look out in the field now and it looks clean, and they forget that 3.5 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, they sprayed that and it was full of winter annuals, but they forget in their mind. And that's when this happened is, 3 weeks ago. So.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, great advice as always. I appreciate your time on the call here today. And the key is just get out there and scout, walk those fields, take a look, and then respond accordingly. So again, this is Charles Scoble, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Focus Friday. Have a great weekend.